So this is what Casey had to say about the new Sony A7S III. I had the pleasure of getting to preview the camera and can say it's the best DSLR I've ever used. Here are some thoughts. Most reviews talk about specs. I'm a YouTuber first and specs are never my priority. Usability is what I care about. I can honestly say that the A7S III solves for every gripe I've ever had about every single camera I've ever used. It's as if someone watched all of my videos, many videos I've made where I'm bitching about cameras and addressing every single one of those complaints. The flip out screen is perfect, focus is flawless, super easy to manipulate, menu system is super deep but relatively intuitive. It shoots in what feels like total darkness, 4K 120 is just madness, and the form factor is my favourite. It's a brick, solid, reliable, and could hammer nails with this fucker. I need more time to figure out what I don't like about it and I'll share that. For now, it's as close to perfection as any camera I've ever used, and this is not an ad, I wasn't paid to say this. Nice work, Team Sony. Let's talk about the A7S III versus the A7 III. What's going on? Welcome back to this week's video. My name's Josh Gudgeon. I'm a filmmaker, videographer, content creator from the UK. So if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing. But today we're going to be talking about the A7S III and the pros and cons versus the A7 III and which one I think you should buy. So my A7S III is due to be delivered in about 2 weeks, but I wanted to touch on which one I think you should be using on the A7 III versus the A7S III. The A7 III is about 2 to 3 years old now, and it's something that we use quite heavily in our business here. We've got 2 A7 IIIs, and they are unbelievable. So first of all, I want to go over the specs of that camera and what I think are the most positive things about it compared to investing heavily into the new A7S III. On the A7 III, it's got the ability to shoot in 4K, which is actually 6K downsampled to 4K. It's super crisp, and to say it's 2 or 3 years old, it's still pretty amazing. The autofocus is incredible, and in photography mode, the eye autofocus is pretty much undeniable. Like, it gets it right every single time. We've got the ability to shoot in 100 frames per second in 1080, and obviously 50 and 25 frames per second. If you're in America, that'd be 120, 60 and 30 frames per second. It's a full frame camera, and it's got the ability to shoot 4K without any crop. So that is a massive plus point for the Sony A7 III. So you've got focus peaking to find out when your shots are actually in focus, and you've got zebras to make sure that your shot is exposed correctly. For me, one of the best parts of the Sony A7 III is the customizable buttons. You've got C1, C2, C3, C4, and you've got the settings that you can customize on 1 and 2 on the top dial. So you could put that for slow motion shooting, 100 frames, or you could have it as a photography setting. You can just quickly bounce between the two. I find the customizable buttons really useful for switching between different pitch profiles, for setting the white balance, if I want to crop in and crop out, and if I want to go from manual to autofocus. For me, that's a real plus point for the A7 III. It also comes with a 5-axis image stabilization, which we spoke about on previous videos. I think this is one of the best features of the camera. You don't necessarily need to use a gimbal when using this camera. If you can keep a good, steady shot, the IBIS will really help you out to get a really smooth shot, especially if you're shooting in a higher frame rate. And one of the last things I wanted to touch on is the dynamic range. Although the S-Log shoots in 8-bit, the dynamic range, I feel, is incredible. A lot of people say that, oh, the 8-bit S-Log isn't good enough to color grade. If you start pushing it too far, it'll break down. That's the same with any picture profile, but we've never seen a problem with color grading the S-Log footage out of the Sony A7 III. We've got some pretty good LUTs that we use, which we've developed, but just the S-Log 2 to Rec 709, just a basic color correction, does look amazing. You hear a lot of talk saying that the Sony color profile is terrible and Canon's better. Well, I can definitely say that's not the case. If somebody's saying to you that the Sony colors are bad, it's not the Sony colors that are bad, it's their color grading that's bad. It's not hard to get the colors that you want out of the Sony. And if you really wanted to get the Canon colors out of your Sony, you could just look online, change all the base settings, and you could have your Sony shooting like a Canon. The pros definitely outweigh these made up cons by the Canon fanboys. So they're just some of the main features of the Sony A7 III that you should consider when you are looking at the A7S III versus the A7 III. But let's talk about some of the specs on the A7S III. We've gone over this in a previous video, so we'll bounce over them really quickly. You've got the ability to shoot 4K 120 and in 1080 at 240, which is absolutely unbelievable. It shoots in 10-bit S-Log, and if you shoot in S-Log 3, it's actually got the same color profile as the FX9 cinema camera. It's got better dynamic range, so they're claiming 15 stops of dynamic range. It's got better autofocus. It's got better colors. And obviously, most importantly, it's way better because Casey said so in that tweet. But one thing you need to consider is, can your computer handle the new file sizes? Obviously, we're shooting a higher frame rate. You've got S-Log 3 with a higher bit rate. and it's going to put a lot more pressure on your computer system. Can you afford the storage for it? Because the file sizes are going to be so much bigger, it's going to run you a lot of money, and before you know it, you're going down this rabbit hole of having to upgrade all your equipment to work around this brand new mirrorless camera that Sony's brought out. So talking about if your computer can handle it, I've managed to get my hands on some of the new Sony A7S III footage that I want to have a look at and go through a base color grade with you, and let's see what it actually looks like. This footage was from James Matthews. We'll put a link to his channel in the description below. He was kind enough to open up a Google Drive folder with a bunch of footage that he's shot to let us smaller YouTubers take a look at it. So I'm gonna have a quick look at that, see how it handles on my Mac, see if I have to use proxies and all that fun stuff. But I'm lucky that my new Mac is a 2020 MacBook Pro. We'll put a card above there for the review that we gave after 3 months. Right, so I've imported the footage into my timeline. I've not used proxies. I've had a bit of a play around with the speed of the initial clip, and I just want to see if it'll run correctly without any drop frames or interference. Straight off the bat, you can see that the dynamic range of this thing is just unbelievable. The detail that you've still got in the clouds, as well as the actual skin tones, is pretty unbelievable. So I'm going to be using Color Finale to do my color grading on this. This is my preferred software to use. You can just use the native color grading it's built into Final Cut, but I've just found that Color Finale just works a lot better for my workflow. You've got a lot more manipulation as far as when you want it to really change the colors of the image. So first things first, let's get a scopes up on the left-hand side. First layer that I'm going to do is the color wheels layer, where I'm going to drop the shadows, lift the highlights, and adjust the mids, just so that we've got that full range of colors and lights. So we drop the shadows down just above the 0 line, increase the highlights, they're just about to touch the 100, and let's just drop the mids ever so slightly. So straight away that looks pretty good. And again, we can just increase the saturation on the right hand side there, and you've got a pretty nice looking image there. So from here we can add a bit more of a creative look on it. We can throw in an S-curve, start adjusting the greens and magentas, but we'll throw in an S-curve to start with, see what it looks like. And finally, I'm just going to drop the greens ever so slightly out of the highlights. Again, Sony's have always been notorious for having that little bit of green in the highlight, which I can see on this, but it's not as prominent as it is on the A7 III. But if we just take your highlights from the green and you just drop it down a fraction, if you go too far, look, it goes into the magenta too far and into the reds. But if you just drop it down just a fraction, if we toggle that on and off, you see the difference that we've made there. Again, it does look like it's got quite a lot of magenta into the highlights there, so if we just drop that down ever so slightly, these are just fractional, marginal movements there, but they make a hell of a difference. And for me, I'd be super happy with that color grade right now. If you really wanted to get the teal and orange look, you can go onto the color wheels option there, the 6 vectors, go into the blues, and if you look on this line here, that's your skin tone line, you see the blues are somewhere between the blue and the cyan, but you can adjust the hue of the sky, so the blue of the sky, and you can drop it down more into the cyan, which again, if you get your skin tone line and your blue line to be pretty much in line with each other, you get what we would normally see as the orange and teal look. Now that color grade is complete, we can copy and paste that across the other clips, make some final adjustments, and then we'll show you what the final product looks like. All I can say is after playing with that footage and putting a little bit of an orange teal look onto those clips from James Matthews, I'm absolutely buzzing to get my A7S III delivered. However, to sort of conclude this video, what I would say is the only reason I would advise anybody to get the Sony A7S III is if you are going to be shooting high-end commercial work or you're actually making a living from video production. We still use the Sony A7IIIs in our business. We've got 2 of them and the FS5, and it's more than sufficient for like 99% of the client work that we do. The only reason I'm getting the Sony A7S III is because I want to get back into vlogging. I want that flip LCD screen, and some of the higher end jobs now being able to use 240 frames per second or 200 if we're in the UK, and the option to shoot 4K 100 frames. That will look amazing when we do pair it up with the A7 III. It's something that we can really use within our business. But if you're going to be making YouTube videos like this, just talking headpieces or just the general stuff and not vlogging where you don't need an LCD screen, flipping out. I'd say get the Sony A7 III. You could probably pick one up secondhand now for around the £1,200 mark, as opposed to the £3,800 that it's cost for the body of the A7S III. If you pay £1,200 or even buy one brand new for around £1,500–1,600, and what you would have spent on the A7S III, if you invest the rest of that money into a lens or a monitor or a decent tripod, a gimbal, you're gonna get a much better kit for the amount that you'd spend on just the body of the Sony A7S III. So get yourself a deal, get yourself the A7 III if you think that's more so what you need it for. Look at the workflow. Do you have a computer that can handle it? Can you handle that much memory? Are you gonna have to start upgrading other equipment just to work around this new body? Make a decision that works for your workflow. And I hope you've enjoyed this week's video. If you have, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and I'll be back next week with another video. See you there.